Good morning, everybody. I'm Muriel Bowser. I'm the mayor of Washington, D.C. I want to welcome you to the John A. Wilson Building. Today, I'm providing a situational update on the ongoing humanitarian crisis that's taking place in our city as a result of the actions of the governors of Texas and Arizona, who have bused hundreds of people to D.C. each week since April. I am joined by members of my administration, as well as Councilmember Brianna Doe, who chairs the Committee on Human Services. We are also joined by community-based organizations who continue to play critical roles in our response. I'm going to provide some background information so we understand the context of where we are today and how we move forward. We know that migrants coming to and through D.C. are arriving from a range of nations. Their experience in the United States begins when they surrender to federal immigration officials at the southern border. We understand that once they are cleared through a federal immigration process, they are then released on humanitarian parole with a date to appear in immigration court. So after being released to community organizations, some migrants have been offered a ride to D.C. paid for by the state of Texas and state of Arizona. Some people are taking this ride to get to their destinations along the way because it gets them closer to their final destination. And some because they have nowhere else to go. And quite frankly, I believe that some are being tricked or lied to. Our experience is that the vast majority of people move onward to destinations outside of D.C. We know from media reports, and I stress this, that these are numbers we can't exactly verify, but the governors of Texas and Arizona report that they have sent upwards of 9,400 people on buses destined for the District of Columbia. And we know that they are targeting Washington, D.C., not because of any particular ties that the people boarding the buses have to Washington, D.C., but they want to make a point to the federal government. So here you can see a timeline of what I have discussed since April, starting with the announcement back in April, the various discussions that we have had along the way or attempted to have with those states as well as with the federal government, including our coordination with the federal government to identify a community-based organization, Samu in our case, and the United Way, who has helped facilitate the federal grant, the FEMA Emergency Food and Shelter Program grant, which I believe now is up to almost $2 million to help with this effort. And we are also grateful to the other community-based organizations who have participated in this aid, including Catholic Charities and Keresen. As you've heard me say a number of times, that we, regardless of the federal response, which I think has been lacking in some respects, that the District of Columbia would continue to work with our partners to advance what we need and to make sure that our systems in D.C. are not broken by a crisis that is certainly not of our making. And we are putting in place a framework that will allow us to have a coordinated response with all of our partners. So this response will include a program to meet all buses, and given that most people will move on, our primary focus is to making sure that we have a humane and an efficient welcome process that will allow people to move on to their final destinations. That process will include us understanding the needs of the people arriving, their basic needs, when they arrive in the district. We will also set up a system that is distinct from our homeless services system, that is tailored to the needs of migrants and ensures our response to this humanitarian crisis is consistent and well coordinated. We, of course, do everything that is consistent with our values. We are proud of the progress that we've made in our homeless services system that better targets and meets the needs of DC residents experiencing homelessness, and we remain committed to making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. We are also recognizing that the district's homeless services system is not set up to support the unique needs of migrants coming into DC, nor are our community-based homeless service providers staffed to support the needs of migrants. And we realize that we need a new system, and that's what we will advance today. I am establishing a new office within the Department of Human Services called the Office of Migrant Services. This new office will, as I said, be housed in DHS, and it will help us tailor our needs for migrants to provide reception services or spit services, meals, transportation, urgent medical needs, transportation to connect people to resettlement services and the like. We are allocating an initial $10 million to stand up the new office and support organizations working in the field. We will seek reimbursement from FEMA for all eligible services. And we have experience working with FEMA on the reimbursement of eligible services, and I'll say a little bit more about what we think FEMA could do to make sure that states and cities like ours aren't left holding the bag. And so in order to create this new offices, I am declaring a public emergency. And this public emergency will give my administration the following authority: to establish a migrant services office with the DHS and direct the department to provide services and supports to migrants arriving from the southern border states, authorize the city administrator and the chief financial officer to set aside and spend funds to respond to the emergency, to authorize the chief procurement officer to respond to the emergency, and it directs the city administrator and the department to establish new programs that expand or modify existing programs in response to the emergency. I will also be sending emergency legislation to the council that codifies the new migrant services provisions. So we look forward to beginning this next chapter in our response. We recognize that we don't know and we have no control on all that is coming towards the district, but we do have control on how we make sure that our values are present in all that we do, and the hard work that we have done to build our system of human services for DC residents is not broken. So with that, I want to acknowledge Councilmember Nadeau, and we can take a few questions.
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to also acknowledge the many partners who've been involved since the beginning. Cares and Catholic Charities, Samu, our mutual aid groups, so many of our faith entities, our faith-based organizations, churches, synagogues, and volunteers across the city doing what we always do here in the District of Columbia, which is welcome folks and help serve them. I see today we have many of those groups represented, as well as other longtime advocates in our Latino community. So it's wonderful to see you all today. So it's been said, but it's worth reiterating, that the governors of Texas and Arizona have created this crisis. And the federal government has not stepped up to assist the District of Columbia. So we, along with our regional partners, will do what we've always done. We'll rise to the occasion. And I'm so thrilled to see the mayor's emergency today, and look forward to working with her on getting the emergency legislation passed through the council as well. In July, I worked with colleagues on the council in drafting a letter to the mayor asking for 5 things: funding for emergency services, dedicated district staff to respond to the migrants arriving, demands of dignified arrivals from Texas and Arizona, and respite space, as well as access to COVID testing and isolation. And today, the mayor has finished responding by taking action. This will allow the executive to answer every demand in our letter. And my hope is that all the members who joined me on that letter will also join in this effort today. We know Mayor Bowser is already providing testing and isolation. They've already stepped up to demand dignified arrivals. And this allows our government to do all it can to fund emergency services, dedicated staff, and pursue a respite space. I've also been working regionally in my role as chair of a committee at the Metro Washington Council of Governments. We were able to pass unanimously a resolution for regional cooperation through our departments of human services and through our emergency management systems. I'm proud that that resolution has been adopted by the full Council of Governments for the region, which is our 25 closest in jurisdictions in the DMV, and that we will be discussing it further this Friday at the Human Services Committee of the COG as well, because undoubtedly this requires a regional response to be complete. We know, as the mayor said, that the majority of those arriving are just passing through, and for those who do stay, we will do what we always do. We will welcome them into our community. But at the same time, by creating this system, by creating these new programs, we'll be able to adequately serve them and their needs. Our systems right now are just not set up to serve them in the way that they need, to assist them in getting to their final destination. We've learned from border towns like El Paso and Brownsville. And in many ways, the governors of Texas and Arizona have turned us into a border town. We don't know how long this will take to resolve. We don't know how long they will continue busing. And so the right thing to do here is to be prepared to ensure we can greet every bus. We can get people off on the right foot. We can get them where they want to go. And that will ultimately help them in their immigration process. So I'll leave it there. And I thank you, Mayor Bowser, for your leadership.
Thank you, Council Member. Okay. Yes, if you could just introduce yourself.
Yes, Leonard Fleming, DC News Now. Mayor, how did you come up with the $10 million figure? And you talked about FEMA reimbursing you. What is the process for that, and are you certain that FEMA will reimburse you?
We are certain that these are qualifying expenses. The initial tranche, which we will take from our contingency cash, really represents how much we think it will get started to have a contract staff, which remains one of the biggest issues that we need. We need people to make sure that we have coverage throughout the day. So the largest part of that number is an estimate on what it will take to get a contractor on board. Any other questions? Yes.
Mayor Bowser, why have you not come out more forceful against the Biden administration on what's happening?
I've said frequently what we need from the federal government. I've said frequently how disappointed I am that our first need for more people on the ground that helps to respond to a humanitarian crisis quickly. We have called on the National Guard and been granted the National Guard a few dozen times since I've been mayor, so I'm very disappointed in that. And also, I'm very disappointed in not having a federal site that we can use.
So is he partly to blame here then?
Is the federal government?
The president?
Yes. The president, the White House, and anybody else who was involved in the National Guard not being granted for the district's humanitarian response. Yes.
Mayor, going along with that, where are those conversations with the federal government at this point?
They're ongoing. And anybody else who hasn't asked a question? Yes.
Hi.
Can you just introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Amanda Michelle Gomez, WAMU DCist. Migrant families are currently staying at 2 hotels, the Days Inn and Hampton Inn. Do you anticipate moving? It sounds like this office is going to be providing temporary accommodations, or are you going to continue to move more families in there, or I know the Hampton Inn is a COVID hotel. It's used for COVID quarantine. So are families going to be moved out of there and into Days Inn only? What are the housing services provided?
Right now, we consider that a temporary housing service that we're providing at the Days Inn, and it is in line with what the Migrant Services Office will do, provide temporary housing while people are moving on to their next destinations.
Are the families at Hampton Inn going to be, which is a quarantine hotel, going to be moved to Days Inn soon?
I don't know that that's our plan.
Okay. And then a second question, students are being enrolled, migrant students are being enrolled in DCPS. Are there going to be more ESL teachers at those schools that most are going to, or what other supports are those students going to receive once at school?
Our students, regardless of whether they are coming from the Days Inn or they're coming from any other location in the district, will be served in our schools, and they will be served adequately. Yes, Mark.
I got several questions, Mayor Bowser.
Okay.
Can you tell us the number of students who are currently enrolled from the asylum seeking?
We think we have about 70.
And then can you tell me how many people are currently being housed either in the shelters or in the hotels right now?
Let me get you a specific number, Mark. We can't tell you how many are in the hotels. I'll get that number for you.
And then you mentioned in one of your slides having a presence at Union Station. What's that going to look like? Is that 24/7? Are you going to have a welcome center or some kind of processing center stand up at Union Station?
We don't currently have a space at Union Station. I think you know that we don't control Union Station, and we continue to work on having the appropriate space for our staff, contract staff, and potentially processing of people coming from buses at Union Station or close to Union Station.
Right, so what's that going to look like? Is that going to be something that's going to be, I mean, do you know yet when buses, is that coordination happening between Arizona and Texas that you know when buses leave, ETA on buses arriving, or are you just going to have to stand out there and wait?
We expect to have a 24/7 presence.
And then what about a center? Are you looking to stand up a center that one would both work kind of like Virginia Williams in the sense of a processing center for people as well as a place for people to, I know you had asked for the Armory for something like this. Are you looking for some kind of facility or building a facility like that where people could actually sleep and be processed, or one or the other?
We right now have an example in the region where people, after you kind of having initial discussion, a processing, a triage, if you will, are staying up to 72 hours until they make other arrangements. We think that is a process that works well to deal with the immediate needs of arriving folks from Texas and Arizona. We don't have a likely space in the district. We continue with partner organizations to look for that type of space.
Inside or outside of the district?
All.
Is that breaking news that we're interested in?
What's that?
What the Director Zeilinger just.
94 families, 348 people staying at DC hotels.
At hotels, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned having a contract. Do you know, is that going to Samu? Do you know who the contractor, do you pick the contractor?
No, the contractor would not be the contract would not be with Samu. It would be to support Samu.
I don't understand. Can you clarify that?
It would not be with SAMU. It would be to contract personnel that would support SAMU.
Okay. And can you explain the difference between a state of emergency and declaring a public emergency? Is there something different between there? I mean, we're from COVID, we're used to you declaring a state of emergency or a health emergency. This is a public emergency. Is that different?
You could call it a humanitarian emergency. You could call it a migrant emergency. It's just the semantics, really. What it is a mayor's order that gives me some administrative authority that I don't normally have. And that administrative authority lasts for 15 days. I will be, when the council returns from recess, submitting a request for them to extend that emergency. And this will allow us to, for example, create this new Office of Migrant Services that also streamlines, because we don't currently have a system of services focused on this population, our migrant population. And this allows us to streamline those services while at the same time not burdening our homeless services system. Yes.
Mayor, Ted Hessen with Reuters. I'd like to ask you, do you have a sense of how many people you're preparing to come? And then when it comes to these hotel rooms for the families, what's the approximate cost for each family? Or is there some kind of metric you can give us to explain how much those hotel rooms are costing?
I don't right now, but I'm happy to provide that.
And then overall, do you have a sense of who you're expecting or how many you're expecting or preparing to receive?
All we know, this is what we know, is that the crisis at the border is not lessening, is getting worse. We're told that with uncertainty in, like the political system, as well as just weather, for example, that numbers increase during this time of year. And so we also know the political statements that we've heard from Texas and Arizona. So our expectation is to believe what they've said, and that hundreds of more buses will be coming over the fall. Yeah. Anybody who hasn't asked a question yet? Yes. Oh, let me just finish with the press, and then I'll come. Yes.
Yes, Mayor Bowser.
Yes, Lou.
Tomorrow,
Yep.
with Washington Blade, and as you may know, Mayor, there's been reports that in various border stations where migrants are coming to the country, problems have surfaced regarding LGBTQ migrants, particularly transgender migrants, in terms of discrimination and mistreatment. There's been reports of that. Would you take steps to ensure that programs that you're announcing today and the efforts that you're announcing, those who are carrying them out would have a sensitivity and some knowledge on the potential issues impacting LGBTQ migrants?
Well, thank you for raising that. And anybody that we work with, we expect to uphold our DC values, and that includes in this space. So absolutely. And okay, I'll go for another round. I'll start with Stephanie.
2 questions, Mayor Bowser, if I may. You had mentioned the history of not getting the National Guard cooperation that you've requested in the past. You showed us the timeline starting since April. Why, given this humanitarian crisis that you pointed out, was this action not taken sooner?
We think we're actually taking it at the right time, where we have responded in a lot of different stages, not knowing the full capacity of what we would be dealing with from day to day or month to month. And so we thought it was very appropriate that we worked with our partner organizations who are very experienced in this work, who've done migrant services work, to work with them. The sheer capacity, or the sheer, not capacity, was the volume of the work and our expectation that could increase really necessitates a broader coordination from us.
And then in reverse to that, or previous question, how does taking this action not give any credence to the frustrations being voiced by those governors of Texas and Arizona?
My response has nothing to do with what they think or what they say or what you think about what they say. Our response involves 2 things. How can we live up to our values and make sure that we have a humane, efficient process to deal with a crisis not of our making? And how can we make sure that the very robust human services that we have built here in the district that are meant to serve DC residents who are experiencing an emergency aren't broken by their actions. That's what we're talking about today. Yes.
Yes, Mayor, you mentioned earlier about the migrants that some are being lied to and even tricked. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I'm not entirely sure that people know that they're coming to DC. We also got reports, and we get reports that people are getting off at various places from Texas to DC. I'm not sure that people aren't promised that they're going to get X, Y, and Z when they get off buses. So it's just a lot that we don't know that's happening at the southern border when people are coming en route here.
Is the state of Texas doing this?
I don't know. I don't know.
Mayor, Janae with Axios.
Yes.
Is there any communication with Texas or Arizona?
We have attempted communications with all of our counterparts in, I should say, in emergency management and in the Health and Human Services.
So you've reached out to directors, I guess?
Correct.
But not the governors.
Nothing from the governors?
I've answered your question. Yes.
Mayor Bowser, timeline do you have on when you might be able to stand up these support personnel that would be helping Samu?
We're working expeditiously, Mark, and as soon as we know who we'll be working with, we'll announce that.
Can we hear from someone from Samu?
Sure.
What this means for their efforts?
Of course.
And if you don't mind just identifying yourself, we appreciate that.
Hi, thank you. My name is Tatiana Laborde, and I'm the Managing Director of SAMU First Response. And I want to thank the Mayor and then thank Councilmember Nadeau, who have been extremely helpful since day one. We're excited to see this new stage, and this is going to really make our response more robust and make sure that the long-term services that need to be given to this population will happen.
Can I just ask, a lot of the agency, a lot of the nonprofits and NGOs have been critical of Mayor Bowser's request for the National Guard and delay in doing something that she's doing now. What are your thoughts about it taking this long and what's led up to this?
We have no official response to that, but we've been working together since day one.
And,
Yes.
and with Tatiana, how does this, moving forward, what does this mean for your efforts on the ground? What is that going to look like first?
It's going to make it much easier to respond to the 24-hour, 7 days a week emergency. Just as an example, we attended a bus yesterday at 1, yesterday at 10:30, and the team that's here with us has just finished with the morning bus.
Yeah, actually, can I have a follow-up question for Tatiana? I'm wondering, has the number of buses lessened just because buses are now going to Chicago and New York? Yeah, they're going to more places. I wondered how it's changed now, and yeah.
It didn't necessarily lessen because of the other states, but rather because of weather.
Okay, so you're seeing less than, but on weekly, how many folks are you receiving?
Weekly, we're receiving probably 10 buses.
10 buses a week.
Yes.
And then for Mayor Bowser, who will be heading the new office?
We will make that announcement. We haven't made that announcement.
Okay. And then if I could ask an off-topic question.
Let me stay on topic.
Okay.
Can I ask how long it'll take to set up this office then, to get it up and running?
We will, as I mentioned, we're operating in an emergency right now. We'll present to the council legislation when they get back. And then we will work very quickly to get the services set up. Yep. Yes.
Yeah, so one question I had, is the city spend money, this money you're talking about, to get the migrants on their way?
The FEMA eligible expenses include transportation.
So you're giving them the money and getting reimbursed, or FEMA's giving them the money directly?
We will work with all of our partner organizations on how to best facilitate that.
But I mean, it's happening now, right?
It is.
So how's it working?
It's working with the partner organizations.
Okay, so the other part here, what's the reaction of DC residents to this? I mean, are you getting complaints or what's What's happening?
DC residents want to make sure that we are live up to our values and that our systems continue to work for them.
So are you hearing from them? Or?
I do hear from them. I hear from them with points along the spectrum. I heard from them around the DC National Guard issue, where they thought it made perfect sense, and they wanted to make sure that the federal government was doing its part in a federal issue. Now, mayors do a lot of things, but we are not responsible for a broken immigration system. What we need in this country is we need the Congress to do its job and fix this immigration system. We have millions of people living in this country who don't have the means to take care of themselves and have a secure life. And we need a pathway to citizenship for them. We need a pathway to work for them. And that is not something that mayors can do. Yes.
I'm a DC resident, and I can tell you that I appreciate these steps. It's painful, it's sad what's happening.
It is.
But you have really stepped up and taken on an issue which has been imposed on us. And I applaud you, and I applaud your team. And I hope that people here asking the negative questions look at the positive steps that we're taking to help these people who are the most vulnerable.
You said it right. It's sad, it's deplorable what's happening, and people, I fear, are fleeing terrible situations, looking for a better life in our country. And our country, it really has to have a reasonable system where people can come to our country and live here and be able to take care of themselves and their families. Yep.
So I understand the practical aspects of the I'm sorry, Antonio Olivo at the Washington Post. I understand the practical aspects of the declaration of public emergency and the adherence to DC values, but you sound very frustrated, and it sounds like you're boxed in by the politics of this. A declaration of emergency is something that the governors of Texas and Arizona want to see for their purposes. Do you feel that frustration? Do you feel boxed in?
No, what I feel is, listen, I'm a mayor, and I have the first responsibility to make sure that this city operates. And anybody in my position likes to know what the environment is. Unknowns are bad. And what we're dealing with is a big unknown. And it's an unknown that's being imposed on us. And it is an unknown that there are we're going to do our best to prepare for, to make sure that we have an infrastructure that we didn't have. We're not a border town. I think that was your article, right? We're not a border town. And so basically what we're doing today is a new normal for us. We have to have an infrastructure in place that allows us to deal with the border crisis here in Washington, now that has visited us in Washington, D.C. Any other questions?
Off topics?
Yes. No, okay. No more questions? Off topics. Amanda had the first.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, the Post reported today about the MPD has started enforcing a curfew for juveniles. And so I'm wondering why, and you started this in last month, I'm wondering why not make a public announcement like PG County did and warn youth and their caregivers that they should be inside at a reasonable hour. That's my first question.
Well, we've always had a curfew. Like, that's not anything new.
I don't think, but enforcement hasn't. I mean, you haven't enforced it. I
think that there have probably been one-off issues of enforcement. There's not a widespread program, but I can promise you if the police encounter a 13-year-old out at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're probably going to get curfew enforced.
And I wonder why enforce a curfew. I know that some analysis of these curfews have said they're ineffective in reducing crime.
Should a 13-year-old be out in the middle of the night? Whether it's a crime, or he could become a victim of a crime, or in some other unsafe situation. So call it what you want, but if a 13-year-old is out in the middle of the night, they need some adult protection. So I answered that question, but Deputy Mayor Geltard is here. He's going to have some more specific information about the incidents if the police encounter a juvenile who needs to be in custody.
Thank you, ma'am. And as the mayor said, we have had the Juvenile Curfew Act of 1995 is when it went into effect. 2017 was the last time that there was any major enforcement across the city. And as the mayor said, there are instances where the curfew is enforced at times because exactly what she said, we want to protect our youth. And that's what this is all about. You can go to MPD's website and they have the full pamphlet on there of what the curfew is, what they do to enforce it. But really, the bottom line is the police officers will take the person home. And that's what we're doing. So there's no widespread enforcement. There's been no change in our policies on this. When it's necessary to enforce for the protection of our youth, our MPD officers will do that.
Oh, could I follow up on that, Deputy Mayor? Because in the past, when you have started ramping up enforcement of this, you've held a press conference. You have given notice to parents and to students. It's usually at the end of summer when they're going out on summer break. And I think it's a legitimate question to ask why the city didn't just put out a notice to parents and say, hey, look, we're going to start enforcing this again, or you want to be conscious of this, or it just seems like we all pay pretty close attention in this room, right? And we were all kind of caught off guard by this. So
I'm not certain, Mark, what you're caught off guard by. As I said, there's been no ramp up of the enforcement of it. There's been a steady enforcement of it when necessary.
Show us those numbers.
And there's no serious number or uptick in numbers that we've had over this summer than we had over last summer, or, the curfew is in place. It's an act that's been in since 1995. We can talk with MPD and get those numbers. Sure.
Today?
We can get those numbers for you, Mark.
Today?
We can get the numbers for you.
Can you give us? Can you give us an update on the enforcement of the codes for the marijuana gifting shops? Has there been a delay in this?
We have no comment on it. There hasn't been a delay. I don't know what you mean. Has there been a delay?
So now the department in charge of supervising this, they're actually going out and enforcing.
Are you talking about ABRA?
Yes.
Okay, you'll have to ask ABRA if that's a policy, if that is an initiative of theirs. Yep.
Your DC Shadow Rep's home was shot up last night. He tweeted it out. Have you been in contact with him, and what's your response to the gun violence that's going on in the district?
I'm not familiar with that incident, but I will definitely find out. Yep.
Mayor, going back to the curfew question, in the different jurisdictions that you partner with Georges County, some of the questions were, how would this be enforced? Is it just like if a 13-year-old is out, for example, that you mentioned, would they be brought in? Or are police expected to now patrol these areas where young people are known to hang out? If it's a case of patrolling those areas, do you think that that's a viable solution when police, we know the numbers are strapped in the District of Columbia?
Are you asking me about Prince George's County?
I'm asking about whether you think that that's a viable means of crime prevention in the district, and what is happening in the District of Columbia when it comes to this youth curfew. Are there going to be officers now focusing specifically on these places of youth gathering, or is it just every now and then if the teen is caught out and not supposed to be out?
I would like to ask the chief to respond to you directly about any deployment concerns that he has, but to the points that have been raised here, we have not announced, I have not announced or directed a new initiative around juvenile curfews. I do feel very strongly that juveniles should be in the house, however, because we want them to be safe, we don't want them to be unsupervised, and we don't want them to be victims.
Just a follow-up though, do you think that it's effective that police in the District of Columbia should be actively patrolling those places where youths are known to gather?
They are actively patrolling those areas. They're actively patrolling them right now.
But specifically to enforce the curfew?
Listen, they enforce, some of the biggest problems we have with juveniles is not being at school when they're supposed to be at school. So when you ask me, are police enforcing where juveniles are? They are enforcing truancy right now. They're going to places where juveniles hang out when they should be at school. We had a very unfortunate incident during the first week of school where young people were hanging out somewhere instead of being at school. So we want young people to be where they're supposed to be with trusted adults. School during school hours, after school activities with adults, but after 11 o'clock, they should be at home. Or they should be with a trusted adult, or they should be someplace where their parents feel comfortable with. So that's, I'm not sure if that is your question, but police are enforcing a lot of issues involving juveniles, and not just after 11 o'clock at night, because we have issues with truancy that are problematic as well. And we want young people not to be hanging out with each other before school, when they should be in class.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. A couple more questions in this last one, and yes, sir.
Has there been any update on the standoff over RFK Stadium with Bill Mendelson? Has anything changed between you two?
I'm trying to remember what we last reported to you, but our issue was not with Phil Mendelson. Only the Congresswoman can introduce legislation at the Congress.
I think there's a disagreement between the council not wanting a stadium. They want to put a restriction on.
I do not support telling the Congress to restrict our autonomy, and I won't.
Right, but how is this process going to move along?
That's up to the Congresswoman. The Congresswoman can introduce the bill that's best for DC residents, and we hope that it proceeds.
You know why she hasn't done that yet?
You would have to ask her. Any questions? Any last question?
Gary Sarka, ABC News.
Yep.
Mayor, the numbers show that the performance at OUC improved under interim director Cleo Sabita, but you ousted her and brought back Karima Holmes, the person at the center of the skating. We understand that another order is about to be released in the wake of multiple deaths. And my question is, how can you leave her in charge? And frankly, how many people have to die before there are charges?
I'm not really sure what report you are referring to, but I do know that Karima Holmes brings a level of experience that's unparalleled in my experience in DC government, which goes back 15 years, in understanding all aspects of the job. And I'm also not sure what you're referring to in terms of a different set of performance metrics, but I'm happy to look at those.
Also, obviously there's no more important role in government to protect its citizens. My question is, if it can't be fixed through your office, how can that problem ever get fixed?
What are you talking about? What can't get fixed?
At the OUC.
Well, let me explain something to you about 911 calls. And what did you say your name was?
Gary Serka, ABC 7.
Okay, Gary. The OUC gets thousands upon thousands upon thousands of calls, all with people calling in various stages of distress. Now, if you want to pick out or cherry pick one or two calls, you can do that, but thousands of calls where police and fire and EMS are dispatched to DC residents in times of distress. And so that's what we're focused on. And we are also focused on learning from all calls. If there are things that need to be changed or things that need to be done better, we learn from all of our calls. But what we won't do is really focus on information that's being cherry-picked by one or two people when we have a vast examples of the type of work, stressful work that they do every day.
Aren't there more mistakes being made now than there were?
I have no idea what you're referring to.
Mistakes that are made in dispatch.
I'm sorry?
Mistakes that are made during dispatch that result possibly in further.
What I know is that some people who are reporting on OUC are more interested in talking about mistakes in Karima Holmes than they are in talking about possible mistakes in other people. I don't really know what that's about, but I do recognize that that is happening. What I also know is that with the thousands of calls that they received, if there are any opportunities to change processes or management or looking at how calls are dispatched, we take those very seriously. Okay, Stephanie, you have the very last question.
No, I did want to ask if there's a response to the mental health standoff and an update to that as well that we saw yesterday with the man who was naked and then climbing.
I don't have anything on that right now.
Can we?
Yeah, you can talk to him after. Last question.
Not a question, but just maybe a response to the gentleman. My home, I live in the Ward 4, made a call for 911 because my granddaughter was basically dead. 911 responded in seconds. That case, from my side, I have to say, 911, District of Columbia, thank you so much.
Thank you, Marie. All right, thank you, everybody.